The Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne tied a borrowed apron around her waist and stepped back from the looking-glass to study a stranger. A grey wool gown, plain at the cuffs. A maid's cap covering hair the colour of polished walnut. No emerald ring on her left hand, no pearls at her throat. Only the careful posture of a woman who had spent 30 years being looked at, and was today preparing to be looked through. The October light through the south window was very particular. It came in low and copper, the colour of old pennies, and it found the small scar above her right wrist, the thin white line where the clasp of a particular pearl bracelet had been biting her for 31 years, and laid itself across it, the way a doctor's finger touches a familiar bruise. Henrietta had stopped wearing the bracelet on the morning her husband had been laid in the family vault, 9 Septembers ago, on the grounds that her wrist had had quite enough biting for one lifetime. She had not, in the intervening years, considered that the scar was now a kind of address, a small, identifying mark, the kind of mark that a clever woman, having seen it once, might remember. She tied the apron more firmly. Outside, somewhere along the south colonnade, a magpie was making the irritable, repetitive clatter that magpies made in October. The elms had begun to give up their leaves a fortnight earlier. The long shadows now laid themselves across the gravel by 2:30 in the afternoon. The sound of the magpie was unromantic. Henrietta had always loved magpies for being unromantic. They were a useful corrective on the kind of day when one was preparing to do something faintly ridiculous in the cause of one's only child. You will not get away with it. Her companion, Mrs. Bell, stood in the doorway with the disapproval of 40 years of service compressed into her folded arms. Your son will notice the moment he walks into a room. He has known you all his life, Your Grace. My son is in London until Thursday. Henrietta tucked a final strand of hair beneath the cap. By Thursday, I will know whether the woman he intends to marry is the daughter she pretends to be, or the climber my husband's brother insists she is. The grey wool itched very slightly at the inside of her wrists. She had not worn wool of this weight against her skin since she was a girl of 17 in her mother's still-room, sorting late summer herbs into linen squares. The itch was, she noticed with a kind of cold amusement, the same itch. And if she is the daughter? Then I shall have spent 2 days carrying tea. She turned. The apron was beautifully tied. The gown fitted as if she had worn one her whole life, which, in a way, she had, behind closed doors during a girlhood her own mother had refused to make easy. And if she is the climber, my son will know it before he sets the date. Outside the window, the elms along the South Avenue were burning copper in the October afternoon. A travelling carriage had just turned in at the lodge gates. 2 horses, modest harness, no liveried outriders. Henrietta watched the carriage approach, and her hands grew very still on the apron. That is her, she said. That is your future daughter-in-law. Mrs. Bell did not soften her voice. Walking into a house where her mother-in-law has dressed up as a chambermaid to test her. May the Lord see clearly what he has done. Henrietta did not answer. She had already crossed to the servants' stair. The carriage drew up at the foot of the south terrace 17 minutes later. A footman handed down a tall young woman in a travelling cloak of dark plum wool, a colour Henrietta noted with reluctant respect. Not the timid grey of a girl hoping to please her future mother-in-law, but a deliberate, deep, almost autumn leaf plum. The girl set both feet on the gravel, looked up at the long stone face of Ashbourne Hall, and did not gasp. She also did not curtsy to it, the way most visitors did, half in awe. She looked at it the way a builder might look at a barn she had been asked to make habitable. Then she turned and held out a gloved hand to the small figure climbing down behind her, a girl of perhaps 11, in a sensible blue pelisse, with a face like a serious owl. Step where I step, the young woman said. The gravel is loose on the right. The child stepped where she stepped. Henrietta, watching from the carved stone alcove that hid the side terrace from the drive, drew in a slow breath. Of all the things she had imagined finding in this Miss Charlotte Wickham, Kindness, cunning, vulgar London polish, country shyness. She had not imagined this. The young woman had brought a sister, and was caring for her as if she were a queen. 5 minutes later, Henrietta crossed the marble hall with a tea tray in her arms, eyes lowered the appropriate 3 inches, and said in a voice carefully roughened around the vowels, "Miss Wickham, your room is ready. May I bring you tea in the small parlour, or would you prefer it upstairs?" Charlotte Wickham, 26 years old, 22 miles tired, and entirely unaware that the maid before her was the woman whose surname she was about to take, set down her travelling reticule and smiled. Not the painted smile of a London debutante, but the open, slightly weary smile of a woman who had had a long day and meant to be friendly. "In the small parlour, please. My sister has not eaten since Banbury, and there is more light there. What is your name?" "Bessie, miss." "Bessie." Charlotte stripped off her gloves. "Will you take Helen with you and find her something with butter on it? Anything with butter. She is impossible without butter." The child Helen looked up at Henrietta with the grave seriousness of a magistrate. "I'm perfectly possible without butter," she said. "Charlotte exaggerates because she is the older sister." "By 8 years, my love." Charlotte touched the crown of the child's head. "Which entitles me to exaggerate." Henrietta heard herself say, "I shall fetch her some scones with butter and conserve, miss." And she walked down the corridor towards the kitchen, carrying a tea tray and an entirely unexpected lump in her throat. She had been a mother. She knew that touch on the crown of her head. It was not the touch of a fortune hunter who had brought a sister along for sentimental scenery. It was the touch of a woman who had been raising that child for years. Mrs. Bell, who had been pretending to polish a candelabrum within hearing range, fell into step beside her. "Well?" she murmured. "It is too early," Henrietta murmured back. "But you may take the conserve from the morning room, the apricot, not the gooseberry. And tell cook the child is not to eat the seed cake. Children of that age do not chew it well, and I should prefer she did not choke on her first day in this house." "Yes, Your Grace." "Bessie," Henrietta corrected, softly. "Yes, Bessie." In the small parlour, Charlotte Wickham had taken off her plum cloak and stood at the long window in a high-necked gown of dark bronze silk. A colour, Henrietta thought as she came in with the tray, that ought to have made any sensible lady's maid weep with envy. The light from the west window caught the edge of Charlotte's hair, and Henrietta saw, with the precision of a woman who had once been the most painted face in London, that Miss Wickham was beautiful. Not London beautiful, not the dressed and curled beautiful of a successful debutante. Country beautiful. The beautiful of a woman who walks 4 miles a day in all weathers, and has not learned to be afraid of her own face. Helen had climbed onto an ottoman by the fire, and was studying a portrait of the late Duke with the intent puzzlement of a child reading a book she had not been allowed to open. "Is that the Duke?" she asked. "That was my husband," Henrietta heard herself begin, and corrected just in time. "That was the late Duke, miss. The young Duke's father. Departed 9 years gone." "He has kind eyes," Helen said. "Charlotte, he has kind eyes." Charlotte turned from the window. For the first time, the lines around her mouth softened. Not into a smile, but into something quieter. Something Henrietta had not seen on a young woman's face in many years. Recognition. Charlotte Wickham was looking at the portrait of the late Duke of Ashbourne, the way one looks at a face one has been told stories about. "He does," Charlotte said. "Adrian, the new Duke, described him to me at length last summer. He said his father liked to bring the dogs into the library and let them sleep under the writing desk." Henrietta set the tray down on a side table. Her hand was steady. Her heart was not. She had not told that story to anyone in 9 years. It was a story she had told her son the autumn after his father's death, in the room above this one, both of them in mourning black, both of them refusing to weep where the servants would see. Adrian had told it to Charlotte Wickham, Adrian had told it to Charlotte Wickham. A woman did not tell a story like that to a fortune hunter she had met 3 months ago at a Bath assembly. A man did not tell a story like that to a woman he meant only to acquire. "Will there be anything else, miss?" Henrietta said. "Yes." Charlotte turned to her. "Could you find me a sewing basket? Helen has torn her pelisse on the carriage hinge, and I should like to repair it before dinner. I do not wish to trouble Mrs. What is the housekeeper's name?" "Mrs. Bell, miss." "I do not wish to trouble Mrs. Bell with so small a matter." "Most ladies in this house," Henrietta said, before she could stop herself, "would ring for a sempstress." "Most ladies," said Charlotte, picking up her teacup, "have never tried to feed a sister on a curate's pension while sewing late into a candlelit January. I learned to be my own sempstress at 14. I should hate to forget the skill." Henrietta dipped her head and left the room. In the corridor, she stopped beneath the great north window. She put one hand against the cold panes and stood for a long moment, looking out across the formal lawn, where the wind was moving copper leaves across grass that had been mown that morning. 3 months ago, in the second week of August, Henrietta's husband's younger brother, Lord Marcus Ashbourne, who had managed the Ashbourne estates during her son's minority, and who had never quite recovered from being passed over by the title, had ridden up from Surrey on a rainy Tuesday and informed her, sitting in this very house, that Adrian's intended bride was the impoverished daughter of a Norfolk curate, with a brother who had run through the family's small inheritance and was now £8,000 in debt to a moneylender in Holborn. Marcus had insisted that the engagement was a transaction, that Charlotte Wickham meant to use the Duke's income to clear her brother's debts, that she would bleed Ashbourne dry within 3 years. Henrietta had listened in growing suspicion. Adrian had broken 3 engagements before this one, gently, with the careful kindness of a young man who had been raised to honor his own conscience. And Henrietta knew her son. He did not propose lightly. If he had asked this Charlotte Wickham to marry him, he had asked because he loved her, and he had asked because she would make him better than he was. And yet a young man newly inherited could be deceived. A young man whose father had been lost to him early, whose mother had carried the duchy in her widow's hands for 9 long years until he was old enough to take it. That young man could be flattered by a clever woman in a Bath assembly room. Henrietta had not slept that night. The next morning, she had written to Marcus that she would consider his warning. And she had begun, quietly, to prepare what she now stood in: an apron, a cap, a roughened voice. 2 days. 2 days to see for herself. In the parlor behind her, she heard Charlotte say to Helen in a low, fond voice, "Eat slowly. There is plenty more, and there will be plenty more tomorrow, and there will be plenty more for as long as you and I shall live." Henrietta closed her eyes. There was nothing in those words of a woman planning to bleed a duchy dry. There was only an older sister telling a younger sister, after years of curate's wages, that the bread had at last become safe. The maid called Bessie unpacked the smaller of the 2 Wickham trunks that evening, with the careful hands of a woman who had unpacked many trunks in her time. She lifted out 4 gowns, 3 pairs of half-boots, a sewing kit of frayed brown velvet, a small wooden writing case, and, at the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a single ivory-handled fan. A fan. A London fan. Of the kind a young lady carried at a ball. Henrietta lifted it out and unfolded it. The painting on the silk was a country scene. A small church, a curate in black, a girl with a little blue book on the church steps. The girl had Charlotte's profile, drawn with the rough affection of an amateur hand. On the reverse, in a child's careful printing, "To my sister, on her birthday, that she may have one beautiful thing for the assemblies. Helen Wickham, June 1822. Henrietta refolded the fan. She set it back into the tissue paper. She closed the trunk. A clever fortune hunter would have brought 6 fans, each costlier than the last. Charlotte Wickham had brought one. A gift from a child who had saved her pocket money for it. Mrs. Bell, who had come to the doorway in the proper character of a housekeeper, inspecting the work of an unfamiliar maid, gave a small, dry cough. "You are crying, Bessie." "I am not." "You are. There is a tear on your left cheek. 2 now. 3, if you do not move quickly." "Damn the woman," Henrietta whispered. "She has won me with a fan." "She has not won you with a fan, Your Grace." Mrs. Bell's voice was severe, but not unkind. "She has shown you that there is no winning to be done. There never was. Your son knew already." "My son is 26. "Your son is 26 and has more sense than you and his uncle put together. I tell you so because I've known him since he was 8. Henrietta turned. The wet streaks on her cheeks were undignified. The cap was undignified. The grey wool gown was undignified. "Marcus is wrong," she said. "Marcus has been wrong since the day your husband was born the elder." "What am I to do, Mrs. Bell? I am dressed as a parlour maid in my own house. My son arrives Thursday morning. The girl I came to expose is—" She broke off, looked at the closed trunk, and finished, more softly than she had begun. "Is exactly what my son said she was." "You may take off the cap," said Miss Bell, "and put on your emerald earrings and meet her properly at dinner." "I cannot." "You can. It will be the simplest thing in the world. Tell her you came home a day early and were dressing when she arrived." "And lie to my son's wife, on her first day in this house?" "No, I will not begin our acquaintance with a lie. I will see this through. 2 more days. Then I will tell her, myself, in my own room, in my own gown, and I will trust her to forgive a foolish old woman who loved her son too well to be careful." "You are 49, Your Grace, not old." "I am old enough to know better." Henrietta retied the apron strings with an angry tug. "Bring me the apricot conserve. I will carry her dinner up myself." Mrs. Bell sighed the sigh of a woman watching a stubborn child climb a familiar tree. "Yes, Bessie." Adrian Ashbourne, 6th Duke of Ashbourne, 26 years old, broad through the shoulders in a way that had startled his mother on the day he first put on his father's old riding coat at 19 and discovered it fitted him exactly, arrived home a full day earlier than expected, on a Wednesday evening, in a state of impatience he had not bothered to hide from his coachman. He took the gravel of the South Avenue at a canter that scattered crows out of the elms. He swung down from the saddle before the groom had finished his bow. He strode into the marble hall in boots still flecked with the mud of 2 counties, and called, before the door had fully closed behind him, "Charlotte! Mother!" A clatter from the upstairs corridor. A woman's voice, Charlotte's, low and amused, saying, "I am here. Your mother is not yet returned, I am told." "My mother?" Adrian frowned. He pulled off his riding gloves. "Cousin Marcus wrote that she was here. He said she'd come back from Bath on Monday." In the small parlour behind the staircase, hidden by the half-open door, a tea tray clattered against a side table, then steadied. Charlotte appeared at the top of the stairs in the bronze silk gown, her hair loosely pinned, Helen half asleep on her hip in a flannel nightdress. She came down the stairs with the unhurried grace of a woman who had carried sleeping children down many staircases in her life. "She is not here," Charlotte said. "The housekeeper informs me she is expected tomorrow. I have been amply attended to. I have a sister who has eaten 3 scones. I have a room that is twice the size of our drawing room at home. And I have a duke who is muddy to his knees." Adrian laughed. He laughed in a way that Henrietta, listening from the dimness of the parlour with a teacup held very still in her hand, had not heard in 9 years. She knew that laugh. She had heard it last in the August of her widowhood. After that, the laugh had become rarer and more measured, and then it had simply stopped. Adrian had grown into the Duke first and the young man second, and the second had been quietly buried beneath the first. This new laugh, Surprised, delighted, embarrassed, was the laugh of a young man who was in love. Henrietta set the teacup down soundlessly. She slipped out through the servant's door and stood in the back corridor with her hand pressed flat against the wainscot. She had been entirely wrong. About everything. Marcus had not been mistaken about Charlotte's brother. Henrietta had verified the man's debts herself before riding out from Bath. Marcus had not been mistaken about the £8,000. But Marcus had been catastrophically wrong about Charlotte. The brother was a fact. Charlotte was not the brother's accomplice. Charlotte was a woman who had built her life around protecting a child from the consequences of a young man's gambling, and who would, Henrietta knew now with the cold certainty of a parent recognizing another parent, have walked from Norfolk to Bath barefoot before she let her brother touch a penny of Adrian's money. The question was not whether Charlotte was a fortune hunter. The question was, what did Marcus want with the lie? Henrietta did not yet have the answer, but she would have it by Thursday night. Dinner that evening was a small one. The Duke, Charlotte, and Helen, who insisted on staying up because she could already see that this was the kind of household where children were allowed at the dinner table, provided they did not crumble bread into their water glasses. The maid called Bessie carried in the soup tureen. Adrian glanced at her once, the casual glance of a young man being served by a member of his own staff, and looked back at Charlotte without seeing his mother at all. Henrietta nearly dropped the tureen. Mrs. Bell, who had been pretending to oversee the footman at the sideboard, caught her by the elbow with the iron grip of an old conspiracy and steadied her hand. "Good God," Henrietta hissed under her breath. "He looked through me." "You are wearing a cap, Your Grace. He has known me 26 years. He has known his mother 26 years. He has never met Bessie. People do not see what they do not expect to see. You taught me that yourself when I was 22. Charlotte was speaking. Adrian was listening, with the attentive stillness of a man hearing the only voice in the room. The dining room at Ashbourne, in the candlelight of an October evening, was a long, golden bronze chamber lined with portraits of late Ashbournes, whom Henrietta had been studying for 30 years, and whom Adrian had been ignoring, with mild filial respect, for slightly less. 2 heavy silver candelabra ran the length of the table. The candles in them had been lit at 6:30, and were now in their first hour, the flames steady, the light pooling on the linen in long, warm rings. The fire in the wide stone hearth at the far end of the room was burning oak. A spaniel, old, partly grey-muzzled, named Patience after a habit of her late master rather than a quality she possessed, slept on the hearthrug with one paw extended toward the fender. Charlotte's bronze silk took the candlelight and gave it back as something quieter, the colour of weak tea, or of the gilt on the spine of a much-used Bible. "My brother William," Charlotte was saying, "is in London. He sends his apology that he could not be here to meet you. He has affairs that have detained him." "Yes," Adrian said. "I imagine he does." A beat. Charlotte set down her spoon. "How much do you know?" she asked. Adrian set down his. "I know about the moneylender in Holborn. I know about the 8,000. I've known since June. My solicitor inquired discreetly before I asked you the second time. I asked you the third time anyway." Charlotte was very still. Helen, who had been arranging her bread crusts into a little crescent at the edge of her plate, looked up at her older sister and said, with the appalling clarity of a clever 11-year-old, "Has William done it again?" "Yes, my love." Charlotte's voice did not shake. "He has done it again." "How much?" "More than last time." "I am sorry," Helen said gravely, and went back to arranging her crusts. The silence in the dining room was the kind of silence that has weight. Henrietta, standing in the half-shadow behind the sideboard, with the soup tureen warm against her hands, did not move. "I will not pay him," Charlotte said to Adrian. "I have told him. I told him in May. I told him in June. I told him in July, in August, and the first week of September. If you pay him, the moneylender will not be the last. He has the disease that runs in the third sons of impoverished gentlemen, and you cannot cure it by paying. I know. You will be asked to pay. I expect to be asked. By Marcus. Adrian's hand closed slowly around the stem of his glass. Marcus has spoken to you. Marcus has written to me. Charlotte's voice was unchanged, calm, steady, the voice of a woman who had spent 5 months refusing to be afraid. 3 times. The last letter arrived a fortnight ago. He told me that if I broke the engagement of my own accord before the announcement appeared in the Gazette, he would settle William's debts privately and ask no further questions. He proposes that I write to you tomorrow, saying I have realized I cannot accept your hand. Henrietta nearly dropped the tureen for the 2nd time. He offered you £8,000, Adrian said, to break our engagement. He offered me £8,000 to break our engagement. And you came here anyway. Charlotte met his eyes across the table. Helen, with the diplomatic instinct of an 11-year-old who has watched many adult conversations, slid carefully off her chair and went to feed crusts to the spaniel by the fire. I came here, Charlotte said, because if I had taken the 8,000 and run, Marcus would have come for you next. She paused. Whatever he wants from this household, it is not the loss of a fortune-hunting bride. It is something larger, and I would rather face it beside you than from a curate's house in Norfolk, reading the news a fortnight late in a borrowed Times. Adrian was silent. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the linen tablecloth and laid his hand, palm up, on the wood between them. After a heartbeat, Charlotte set her hand into it. The maid called Bessie, holding a tureen that had grown unaccountably heavy, turned and walked very quietly back to the kitchen, and was sick in the scullery basin from sheer relief. Later, in the kitchen, Mrs. Bell wiped her hands on her apron and sat down opposite Henrietta at the long oak table. You will tell her in the morning. I will tell her tonight. Henrietta pressed a damp cloth to her temples. I cannot carry her tea tomorrow and pretend I did not hear what was said over the soup. It would be cowardice. Then go and tell her. In a moment. Mrs. Bell, Marcus. Marcus offered her £8,000. Where would Marcus find £8,000? Not from his own pocket. Lord Marcus is a man of expensive habits and modest means. Then he is acting for someone else. Or, said Mrs. Bell, he has promised someone else £8,000 out of a future settlement he expects to control. The 2 women looked at each other across the oak table. My husband's will, Henrietta said slowly. Your husband's will. In the event of Adrian's death, or his failure to produce a legitimate heir within 10 years of his majority, the entail passes to Marcus. And Adrian has been the Duke for 5.5 years. Marcus has 4.5 years to engineer a childless Duke, or a finished one. Mrs. Bell's mouth thinned. I would not have phrased it so plainly, Your Grace. I am Bessie tonight. Bessie phrases things plainly. The Duchess of Ashbourne would have phrased it in 3 subordinate clauses and a French verb. Then Bessie may go upstairs and tell the future Duchess of Ashbourne that her future mother-in-law has been serving her tea for 2 days. I will keep watch at the foot of the staircase. Henrietta rose. She untied the apron. She took the cap off her hair and shook it loose, and the polished walnut fell down past her shoulders, and for the first time in 3 days she looked her age, which was 49, and her station, which was a duchess, and her resemblance to her son, which was unmistakable. Mrs. Bell watched her go up the back stairs and said to the silent kitchen, May the Lord see clearly what he has done. Charlotte was sitting in the window seat of the blue bedchamber with Helen asleep against her shoulder, a single candle on the sill behind her, and a folded letter open in her lap. She did not start when the door opened. She had been waiting for it. Your Grace, she said. Henrietta paused on the threshold. You knew? I've known since this afternoon. Charlotte did not move. She did not want to wake Helen. Bessie, I am from Norfolk. There are perhaps 800 maids in this county, and I have met most of them. None of them have hands like yours. You have a thin white scar on the back of your right wrist, exactly where a duchess wears a pearl bracelet that the clasp keeps biting. Adrian described it to me in Bath in August. He was telling me about the day his father gave you the bracelet, and how the clasp had been biting you ever since, and how Mr. Lawrence had refused, at your request notwithstanding, to paint out the mark in the library portrait. Damn Mr. Lawrence and his impertinence. Adrian thought it characteristic. He was right. He has a great eye for a mother. Charlotte adjusted the sleeping child against her. I did not say anything at tea because I did not know whether you intended to keep up the masquerade for an hour or for a fortnight, and it seemed presumptuous to interrupt either. 2 days. Henrietta came forward and sat down at the foot of the window seat, slowly, mindful of her knees. 2 days was the plan. It has accelerated. Yes, my future husband does have the unfortunate habit of arriving when he is not expected. His father had the same. It is genetic, I think. You will not break him of it. I do not intend to break him of anything, Charlotte said, except perhaps the impulse to pay my brother's debts. There was a pause. You ought to despise me, Henrietta said. For what? For dressing as a parlour maid to test you. Your Grace, I have spent 6 years protecting an 11-year-old child from a brother who would sell her teaspoon if she left it out at breakfast. If I despised every guardian who tested an outsider, I should have despised myself first. You were guarding my husband-to-be. I cannot be angry at that. I was guarding my sister. They are the same office. Henrietta found, for the second time that day, that her eyes were wet. I came home from Bath, thinking I should find a clever climber. I have found instead a woman who would have walked from Norfolk barefoot before she let her brother touch your money. I would have walked, Charlotte said. I packed half-boots in case I had to. You ridiculous girl. I am 26. I have not been a girl in some years. You are about to marry my son. You are still a girl. You will be a girl until you are 40, at which point you will become a duchess, and the world will treat you with the precise terror it has accorded me for 30 years. And you will spend approximately 1 afternoon a year missing this stage of your life. I recommend that you remember it carefully. Helen stirred. Charlotte murmured something into her hair, and the child settled. I have a sister, Henrietta said, quietly. I should say I had. She married into Cornwall 31 years ago, and we lost her to a fever 3 winters later. She used to sleep against my shoulder exactly that way. I had not remembered it until this evening, when you came down the stairs with this child. Charlotte did not answer. She put her free hand out, palm up, between them on the window seat, the same gesture Adrian had made over the dinner table, and which Henrietta had not been close enough to him in some years to receive. Henrietta set her hand into Charlotte's. The 2 women sat in the candlelight without speaking for a long time. Then Henrietta said, We have a Marcus problem. Yes, said Charlotte. We do. The morning room of Ashbourne Hall, on a clear October Thursday, with the elms outside dropping their copper leaves 3 at a time onto the gravel sweep, had 4 people in it. The Duke of Ashbourne stood at the window with his arms folded, the morning sunlight catching the dark gold of his hair, and making him look, his mother thought, exactly like his father had looked in the August of 1804, when he had decided to refuse the French ambassador's invitation to a private breakfast. That is, like a man who had already finished thinking, and was now simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. The Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne, in a high-necked morning gown of dark indigo silk, with her walnut hair restored to its proper coil and her emerald ring restored to her left hand, sat at the writing desk with 3 letters spread in front of her. Miss Charlotte Wickham, in the bronze silk of the evening before, refreshed by a clever morning sash of forest green, sat opposite the Duchess, with the calm posture of a chess player 2 moves ahead. Mrs. Bell stood beside the door in the precise pose of a housekeeper who had heard nothing and would, if asked, swear so on her mother's Bible. "Read it again," Adrian said. Henrietta lifted the 3rd letter, the one she had written that morning in the careful script of her early girlhood, when her handwriting had not yet been recognizable to anyone outside her father's library. "My dear Marcus," she read, "I find myself, at last, persuaded by your warnings of the summer. Miss W. has been with us these 2 days. I have observed her conduct. I will not bore you with detail. My son announces the engagement in the Gazette on Saturday. I write now to ask whether your earlier suggestion, that you might assist privately in a separation, with sums sufficient to make the lady comfortable in her withdrawal, remains open. If so, I should be grateful for a meeting at Ashbourne, alone, at your earliest convenience. Yours, in distress, H." Adrian, at the window, smiled without warmth. "He will come." "He will come at a gallop," said Henrietta. "He will come within 48 hours. "He will come tomorrow," Charlotte said. "He has been waiting for this letter for 3 months. "You are remarkably certain, Miss Wickham." "I have his letters. 5 of them." Charlotte drew a thin packet from the writing desk's lower drawer, where she had laid it half an hour earlier. "In 2 of them he indicates that he has, and I quote his exact phrasing, spoken with parties on the Surrey side who would be grateful for the resolution of this matter. Parties, plural, Surrey side. Either he has invented imaginary friends, or he is acting for someone, and that someone has been paying his rent in Bath since June. I made inquiries through my brother's bookmaker. Lord Marcus has been settling debts at 4 London clubs that he could not have settled 3 years ago." Adrian turned slowly from the window. "Who is paying him?" "That," Charlotte said, "is the second half of tomorrow's question." "And the first half?" "Why he wants me gone." "He wants you gone," said Henrietta, "because if my son marries you, my son will have a child. And if my son has a child, the entail will never reach Marcus. As long as the engagement was broken or delayed, the door remained open. He has been holding the door open for 3 years." Adrian, who had known the entail since he was 19, and who had not until this morning permitted himself to think of his uncle's affection as an investment in his cousinless childhood, set his jaw and said nothing. "There is a 3rd question," Mrs. Bell said, quietly, from beside the door. The 3 at the writing desk turned. "There is a moneylender in Holborn," Miss Bell said. "Miss Wickham's brother owes him £8,000. The moneylender does not, as a rule, accept a delay of 3 months for so handsome a sum, unless he has been promised the principal, with interest, from a guaranteed source. Lord Marcus has been Mr. Wickham's friend in London this past summer. Mr. Wickham has been seen riding with him in Hyde Park." A small, cold silence. "My brother," said Charlotte slowly, "has been riding with Lord Marcus. 3 times in August, twice in September." "Then he is in it." "He is in it up to the neck." "He believed," Charlotte said, her voice very even, "that Marcus would buy off my engagement, so that he could continue to live as he wished without my interference. He believed that Marcus had a fatherly concern for the dignity of the Ashbourne line. He is not. Adrian, I want you to understand this. He is not a wicked man. He is a weak man with a habit and a creditor. Marcus has used him." "Marcus has used both of you," Adrian said. "Yes." "How shall we use him in return?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to him. Adrian unfolded his arms. He crossed to the writing desk. He set his hand flat on the wood beside his mother's 3 letters, and Henrietta noted, with a stab of something she had not felt about her son for several years, that his hand had grown to the precise shape of his father's. Broad, square, very still. My uncle Marcus, said the Duke of Ashbourne, has been, I take it, the recipient of a small fortune from someone unknown. Some Surrey gentleman, some London company, some interested cousin of mine I have not yet been told about. We do not yet know who. We do not yet know what they want from this duchy, beyond my failure to produce an heir. We have one letter, Mother's, that will bring him here within 48 hours, believing himself to be on the verge of victory. We have, in this room, 3 witnesses to whatever he chooses to say when he arrives. 4, said Mrs. Bell. 4. Mother, you will be in the small parlour, dressed as a duchess, ready to receive him. I will be, apparently, in London. He will not, until the precise moment, know that I am here. Mrs. Bell will conduct him in and stand at the door. Miss Wickham, Charlotte, will be in the next room with the door ajar, and at the moment of my uncle's most candid admission, I will walk in from the library. And then? Said Charlotte. Then he will have to choose, said Adrian, between telling me who he has been working for and being committed to a court of law for the attempted defrauding of his brother's heir. I shall, of course, ask him very kindly. Once. Twice, if I'm feeling sentimental. Henrietta looked at her son. You have planned this, she said, in approximately 4 hours. In approximately 4 hours, with 2 cups of coffee and a great deal of help from my future wife. You are your father's son. I sincerely hope so. Henrietta picked up the letter to Marcus and folded it. Mrs. Bell crossed to the bell pull. Charlotte slipped Helen, who had appeared at the morning room door in a sensible nightdress and a great deal of curiosity, back upstairs with a promise of preserves and a kiss to the parting of her hair. In the hall, as Henrietta passed her son on her way to the corridor, she paused. Adrian? Mother. I dressed as a maid to test her. I know. Mrs. Bell wrote to me the day she heard the plan. I received the letter in London on Monday. I came home a day early to see what kind of test you were running. Henrietta stared at him. You knew? I knew. And you did not warn Charlotte? Mother, if I had warned Charlotte that you were going to dress as a maid for 2 days to interview her, you would have lost the first piece of intelligence you have ever gathered without subordinates. Charlotte would have arrived performing for the audience, and you would have made up your mind from the performance. And you would have been wrong. And you would have spent the next 30 years sitting opposite my wife at Christmas dinner, suspecting her of arts she does not possess. I let you do it because I trust her. And because I wanted you to trust her without my having to ask you to. You ridiculous boy. I am 26. I have not been a boy in some years. You are about to marry that woman. You will be a boy until you are 40, at which point you will become a duke, and the world will treat you with the precise terror it has accorded your father. And you will spend approximately 1 afternoon a year missing this stage of your life. I recommend that you remember it carefully. Mother, are you quoting yourself? I am. I said it to your future wife last night in the window seat. It bore repetition. She kissed his cheek. He smelled, she noted, of the same shaving soap his father had used, sandalwood and bay, and Henrietta thought with a kind of weary delight that perhaps the worst part of being a parent was that one's grown children kept smelling, at unexpected moments, of one's long-gone husband, and one was expected to continue functioning anyway. She went upstairs to dress for Marcus. The morning of Lord Marcus Ashburn's arrival was the clearest October morning in 7 years. The sky over Ashburn Hall was the precise, polished blue of a teacup turned upside down, and the elms along the South Avenue had finished their copper turning and were now the colour of new pennies, each leaf carrying a small, almost imperceptible weight of frost from the previous night. The lawns had been scythed on Wednesday and rolled on Thursday. The gravel sweep had been raked at first light by 2 of the undergardeners. The long hall fire had been laid by the parlour-maid Bessie, that is, by the same parlour-maid whose apron had recently been folded in the linen press, and whose cap had not, after some discussion, been burnt. At 6 in the morning, and was now burning, in the manner of a fire that has been laid by a person who knows the precise architecture of an old hall flue. Exactly hot enough to be welcoming, and exactly low enough not to suggest extravagance. Henrietta had been awake since 5. She had bathed, very slowly, in lavender-scented water at 5:30, on the principle that one ought to receive a treacherous brother-in-law with one's nerves carefully composed. She had eaten a small breakfast of buttered toast and weak tea at 6:30. She had been dressed in the indigo silk by her own maid by 7:30, with the Ashbourne emerald at her throat, the pearl rings on her fingers, the small chip of pearl in her left ear, which had been her wedding gift from her husband 44 years ago. She had spent the next 3 hours in the writing room, going over, with Adrian and Charlotte and Mrs. Bell, the exact choreography of what would happen when Marcus walked through the door. The choreography had 3 positions and 4 moves. Adrian would be in the library, behind the connecting door, with the inkstand and the 7 sheets of writing paper Mrs. Bell had laid out on the desk in advance. Charlotte would be in the small drawing room beyond the parlour, with the connecting door open exactly 1 1/4 inches. Wider would catch the eye, narrower would not catch the sound. Mrs. Bell would stand at the parlour door in the precise pose of a housekeeper waiting to be dismissed. Henrietta herself would sit at the writing desk by the south window, where the light would be at her back, and Marcus's face would be in the light, and where her own hands could rest, plausibly composed, on a stack of 3 letters she did not, in fact, need. By 10 o'clock, all 4 of them were in position. By 1:15, the parlour-maid Bessie, who had returned that morning to being the parlour-maid Bessie, since the choreography required a maid to bring tea, and Henrietta would not be in a position to make tea while sitting at the writing desk, was crossing the marble hall with a heavy silver tray on which sat a teapot, 2 cups, a small jug of milk, and a single dish of plain biscuits. By 11:15, the rattle of post-chaise wheels was on the gravel. Lord Marcus Ashburn, 4th son of the 4th Duke of Ashburn, 41 years old, handsome in the way of a man who has been told he is handsome since he was 9, and has therefore never had to work to keep the trait in good order, arrived at Ashburn Hall on Friday morning at 11:15, in a hired post-chaise rather than a private travelling carriage, and was shown into the small parlour by Mrs. Bell, with the precise civility of a housekeeper who knew exactly which silver to lay out and which silver to lock away. He kissed his sister-in-law's hand. He admired the indigo silk of her morning gown. He sat down opposite her at the writing desk and produced from his breast pocket a creamy letter sealed with green wax. My dear Henrietta, I was glad, relieved, to receive your letter. I was glad to send it. I had begun to fear that you might lose your nerve. I am 49, Marcus. I do not lose my nerve. I lose my patience. Quite. Well, practical matters. Marcus laid the letter on the desk between them. I have the document here. It is a simple letter of withdrawal that Miss Wickham would write in her own hand. We will send it to her at Norfolk this afternoon by my own courier. £8,000 in promissory notes, payable on her signature, to be transferred to her brother's account at Coutts. Adrian will receive the news on his return from London, in time for him to recover his dignity before the Gazette announcement on Saturday. The matter ends in tears, of course, but quiet tears. You are very generous, Marcus. I am very fond of my nephew. Are you, said Henrietta pleasantly, very fond of his future heir? Marcus paused. Half a second, no more. His future heir, he said, equally pleasantly, is a hypothetical young person we have not the pleasure of meeting yet. Quite. About that. I have a question, Marcus, if I may put it directly. Of course. How much, Henrietta said, very pleasantly, is the Surrey gentleman paying you for Adrian's failure to produce one? Marcus did not move. He did not, to his credit, change colour. He did not stammer. He did not look at the door. But Henrietta, who had spent 30 years at the dinner tables of men who had practiced diplomatic blandness from the cradle, saw the exact quarter-second tightening at the corner of his mouth that told her she had hit the centre of his target on the first arrow. Henrietta, Marcus said gently, I do not understand the question. The clock on the chimney-piece ticked twice. The fire in the grate, which had been laid by Bessie at 6 and tended by an under-housemaid at 10, popped a single small report from a piece of apple wood that had not quite dried. A robin, on the south sill outside the window, hopped along the stone and disappeared into the yew hedge. Henrietta did not move. She watched her brother-in-law's hands. Marcus's hands were beautiful, long-fingered, lightly tanned, with the slightly old-fashioned silver ring on the smallest finger of the left that he had worn since university. And they were, she noticed, very still. That was the tell. A man entirely innocent of a question would have moved his hands. Marcus's hands had stopped. I think you do. 5 letters to Miss Wickham. 3 rides with her brother in Hyde Park. Rent paid to your landlord at Bath since June from an account that is not yours. Subscriptions at 4 clubs in London that you could not have managed 2 years ago. And the £8,000 on this desk. Whose money is it, Marcus? Your information, my dear, is inaccurate. My information is from Coots. Coots will not divulge. But Coots is owned by Mr. Coots. And Mr. Coots was a great friend of my husband's. And Mr. Coots is godfather to my son. I asked him on Tuesday. He told me on Wednesday. A small, brittle silence. You will not, Marcus said more quietly, find the gentleman in question pleased that you have asked. I shall not be asking him. You will. I see. The door from the library opened. The Duke of Ashbourne came into the small parlour in his shooting coat, with the dust of 2 counties still on his boots, which Henrietta thought was a particularly nice touch. He had ridden out to the gatehouse and back specifically for the boots, and stood at the centre of the room, with his hands behind his back, and his face very still. Uncle Marcus. Marcus rose, automatically, the way a man who has lived 41 years in deference to titles rises when a duke enters a room. Adrian, I had not thought. No, you had not. Adrian did not invite him to sit. I have been in the library these 40 minutes. I have heard most of what was said. The part I missed, my mother will repeat for me at lunch. Sit down, Marcus. Marcus sat down. I have one question, said the Duke of Ashbourne, and you will answer it once, in this room, with my mother as witness. If you do not answer it, you will leave this house in the next 10 minutes, and I will instruct Coots and 4 other parties to investigate every account you have touched in the past 4 years. By Christmas, you will be ruined. Do we understand each other? Adrian, do we understand each other? Yes. Who is paying you to break my engagement? Marcus looked down at the letter he had brought. He looked at his sister-in-law in her indigo silk. He looked at his nephew in his dusty boots. He looked, finally, at his own hands. Lord Helmsley, he said, of Surrey, with the support of his eldest daughter, Lady Anne Helmsley, whom you may recall meeting at Brighton in May of last year. They had thought, Lord Helmsley had thought, that you and Anne might come to an understanding. He believed himself encouraged in this hope by certain remarks of mine made in the autumn of 24. When you instead became engaged in August, Lord Helmsley wrote to me. He believed, he continues to believe, that Miss Wickham is unsuitable. He has provided funds for the encouragement of her withdrawal. The sum has been, £15,000, of which 8,000 was earmarked for Miss Wickham herself. And the remaining 7,000 was to be paid to me upon successful conclusion. Marcus. Adrian. You sold me to a Surrey gentleman who wanted me for his daughter, without consulting me, for £7,000, and the satisfaction of seeing your brother's son married to a woman of your own choosing. That is precisely what you did. Marcus did not answer. The fire in the grate had burnt down to a steady, dark red bed. The apple wood was gone. 2 pieces of seasoned oak had taken its place, And the oak was burning the way old oak does, slowly, without sap, with the dry, attentive heat of a fire that intended to be useful for some hours. The smell was the smell of any October parlor in any well-kept house. Oak smoke, beeswax from the chimney-piece, the faint, cool drift of yew from the open window. The smell of a room that had been lived in by people who had taken some care. Henrietta breathed it in. She had loved the smell of this room for 30 years. She had walked into it as a bride of 18. She had walked out of it, briefly, in the August of her widowhood. She had, since then, used it as her writing room, her interview room, the room in which she received the rector and the rural dean and the steward and the wine merchant and the dressmaker and any other visitor whose business was too small to require the long drawing room. It was, in many ways, her favourite room in the house. She had a small, private vow, which she had never spoken aloud, and was certainly not going to speak now, that no member of her own family would ever again be permitted to use it for the kind of business Marcus had been using it for that morning. The library door opened a second time. Charlotte Wickham came into the small parlour in the bronze silk gown and the forest green sash, with Helen by the hand, and stopped beside the Duchess's chair. Marcus rose for the second time. Miss Wickham.
Lord Marcus.
I.
Sit down, Lord Marcus. You have business with my future husband, and with my future mother-in-law. You will have business with me presently.
Charlotte set Helen carefully on the ottoman by the fire and turned.
But first I have a question, and you will answer it. Where is my brother?
Marcus, sitting again, looked at her with something Henrietta watched with great interest. Surprise, perhaps. Some calculation. A small alarm. Your brother is in London. My brother William left London on Wednesday morning. His landlady in Holborn informed my maid by post. 2 letters reached me at 10 o'clock today. One from her, one from a clerk at Beresford & Sons, whom my father had once helped into his post, and who has remembered the favour. He has not been seen since. He owes the moneylender £8,000. Tomorrow is the day the moneylender has set for the principal. If he does not appear with the moneylender, who is, as you know, an unsentimental gentleman, will inform certain parties about the irregularities in my brother's commission accounts at Beresford & Sons, and my brother will be arrested for embezzlement before Sunday. Miss Wickham, I did not know about Beresford. You did not need to know. You needed only to be the kind of man who believed he could buy my brother's loyalty with a private credit line and a fashionable horse. You used him. Lord Marcus, you used him to flatter me into a state of resignation. You used him to position yourself as the family friend whose advice my brother brought home in the August Sunday letters. You did not pay attention to him as a man. If you had, you would have realized that the moneylender was the smaller of the 2 creditors he was running from. The other creditor is Beresford & Sons, who employed him to handle a small inheritance fund for a Norfolk widow. £43 of the widow's money is missing. He took it in June. He took another 200 in August. Beresford have known since the 7th of October. They are charitable men. They gave him until the 15th to make it right. The 15th is tomorrow. Henrietta, listening, watched Marcus's face go from pale to a fine grey. Then he has been arrested? He has not been arrested. He has run. Without the 8,000, he could not satisfy the moneylender. With Beresford about to file the complaint, he could not stay. He is on a coach to Liverpool, I think, with the intention of taking passage to America. Miss Wickham, I did not engineer this. I did not. You engineered the half of it that suited your plan. You did not engineer the half that suited his cowardice. But here is the consequence, Lord Marcus. Charlotte stepped forward to the writing desk. My brother will spend the next 30 years in Boston as a shipping clerk, paying off the widow's £43 at 6 a week, because that is the man he is, and the man you helped him be. The widow will not see her money. The Norfolk parish will not see its embezzler punished. And you, You have paid your private notes from London with the rents of a Surrey gentleman who has been using you as a stalking horse for a daughter who has no more interest in marrying the Duke of Ashbourne than I have in marrying her father." She paused. "Lord Helmsley does not love his daughter, Lord Marcus. Lord Helmsley loves the fact that the Duke of Ashbourne is the wealthiest unmarried peer in his county. Anne Helmsley was engaged in February of this year, secretly, to a barrister of Lincoln's Inn. She has spent the summer trying to find a way to tell her father. He has spent the summer trying to use you to clear the field for a marriage she does not want. You have been working for nothing. You have been used as thoroughly as you used my brother." "How?" Marcus whispered. "Do you know about Anne Helmsley's engagement?" "My future husband's solicitor inquired in London on Tuesday." The Duke of Ashbourne unfolded his arms. "My uncle," he said quietly. "You will write a letter, now, in this room, to Lord Helmsley, returning the £8,000 you have not yet disbursed, and the £7,000 you have. You will explain that the lady's engagement is a private fact of London, which has been concealed from him, and which his solicitor will confirm by Tuesday. You will resign your remaining tenancy at Bath. You will, if you wish to remain in the family at any tolerable level, write a second letter to me, undertaking that for the remainder of your life you will not engage in any private correspondence concerning the disposition of this duchy. If you do these 3 things by sunset tomorrow, I will not write to Coutts, and I will not write to Beresford, and I will not write to Helmsley, telling him what you did. If you do not, well, I have a desk, I have ink, I have time." Marcus was looking at his own hands. "Adrian." "Uncle." Mrs. Bell stepped forward, soundlessly, with a fresh pen and an inkstand. Marcus took the pen. His hand was shaking. Charlotte, Henrietta noted, looked at the shaking hand with neither pity nor cruelty, but with the precise, grey-eyed assessment of a woman who had seen many men shake while signing many letters, none of them as deserved as this. "There," Marcus said, 23 minutes later, blotting the second letter. Will that be sufficient?" "It will be a beginning," said the Duke of Ashbourne. "Mrs. Bell will see you to the door. You will not, I think, be at the wedding." "No." "You will, however, be at Christmas dinner, if you behave." "Adrian, you are my father's brother. He would not have wanted me to cut you out of the household. He would, however, have wanted me to remove you from any room in which decisions are made. You may come to Christmas dinner. You may not come into the library again." Marcus rose. He bowed stiffly to Henrietta. He bowed less stiffly to Charlotte. He hesitated, almost imperceptibly, before Helen, who looked at him with the bright, scientific curiosity of a child who has been allowed to watch grown-ups behave badly. "Goodbye, sir," said Helen, with extreme politeness. "Goodbye," said Marcus, and went out, with Mrs. Bell at his heels. The door closed. The silence in the small parlour was the silence of a room from which a danger has just departed, and which is uncertain whether it is allowed to celebrate yet. It was Helen who broke it. "Was that the cousin?" "Yes, my love." "He is not very kind." "No." "Is he going to bring presents at Christmas?" "Probably not." "Good." Helen returned, gravely, to her crusts. Charlotte sat down at the writing desk. She picked up the unopened letter that Marcus had brought, the letter of withdrawal he had hoped she would copy in her own hand, and tore it carefully in half, and then in quarters, and then in eighths. She did not, Henrietta noted, do it with anger. She did it with the slow, methodical satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting 5 months to tear that piece of paper. Adrian sat down at the writing desk opposite her. "Will you marry me?" he said. "I have said yes 3 times already." "I should like a 4th. "Yes." "In November?" "Yes." "And Helen will live with us?" "Yes." And the chestnut filly father bought in the spring of 1820. We shall give her to Helen to learn on.
Yes.
And your brother? There was a pause.
My brother, Charlotte said, slowly, is on a coach to Liverpool. If you wish to do me an unrequested kindness, send a man after him with sufficient money for an honest passage, and a letter telling him that he is to make himself useful in Boston as a clerk, and not to return to England until he has repaid £43 to the Norfolk widow with his own labour. Do not pay his 8,000. The moneylender is a businessman. He will write off the principal as a bad debt, provided his other clients are not informed. Do not protect William from the consequence of what he is. He has used me for 10 years. He may now make a life that does not include using me. I owe him no more. Yes. And Beresford and Sons. Pay them the £243 of the Norfolk widow's money, with interest from June. I would have done it from my own savings. I have it in the bank at Norwich. But you may pay it from this household if you prefer. It will be the family's first wedding gift.
In a sense. It will. Helen, by the fire, looked up.
Charlotte, may I have a scone? Yes, my love. You may have all the scones. All of them. All of them. Forever.
Henrietta, watching her son and her future daughter-in-law across the small parlour, felt very tired and very content, and very much aware that the woman who had walked through her front door 2 days ago in a plum cloak with her sister had been, from the first instant, more capable of running this duchy than she had been at 26, and that this was no small comfort to a Duchess of 49 who had quietly been wondering for 9 years who would take the burden off her after Adrian married someone she could not respect. She had been spared that. She had also been spared the embarrassment, mostly, of having been wrong about it. She rose. I will leave you two to plan a wedding. Mrs. Bell and I have something to attend to in the kitchen. Mother. Adrian rose too. Yes. Thank you. For what, my son? For dressing as a maid for 2 days. You will mock me with that for 30 years. At least. I shall earn the mockery. She kissed Charlotte's cheek. She kissed Helen's parting. She paused at the door and looked back at the three of them. Her son, his future wife, the small child by the fire who would, in 8 more years, be a young woman in the bronze silk of an Ashbourne ball. And Henrietta found, to her enduring surprise, that for the first time in 9 years, she did not feel that she was holding the duchy up alone. She went to the kitchen. The afternoon settled into the long quiet of an October house. The small parlour had emptied of its disgraced cousin and its torn letter and its uneaten plate of biscuits. The servants had not yet been called to dress for dinner. The master and mistress had not yet begun to require anything. The sun, which had been the colour of old pennies that morning, was now the colour of a polished tea-urn. It laid itself across the long carpet of the central corridor in 3 uninterrupted slabs of light, separated by the wood of the panelling and the slight, almost imperceptible drift of dust that lived in the air of any old house, no matter how diligently the maids beat the rugs. Charlotte spent the afternoon writing letters. 2 letters. One to the Norfolk parish, addressed to the Reverend Mr. Allenby, who had been her father's friend. That first letter explained, in 20 careful lines, that Mr. William Wickham had left the country in regrettable circumstances. It promised that the matter of the Norfolk widow's missing £43 would be settled by Tuesday, by an honourable channel she was not, at present, at liberty to name. The second letter was to Beresford and Sons of Holborn. It requested the precise amount of the deficit and offered payment in full, plus 6% interest from the date of the irregularity, on condition that no public statement be made and no formal charge brought. The second letter Charlotte did not seal. She set it on the writing desk and laid her hand on it for some moments, the way a woman lays her hand on a letter she has been waiting 8 years to write. Henrietta, passing in the corridor on her way to consult with the head gardener about the seasonal pruning of the south yews, looked through the half-open parlor door. She saw her future daughter-in-law, sitting in the bronze silk gown, with one hand flat on a sealed letter, and the other hand resting open on the writing desk blotter. Charlotte was not weeping. She was simply, deliberately, taking the next 3 breaths that the next 8 years had been waiting for her to take. Henrietta did not interrupt her. She closed the parlor door an inch, only an inch, enough to give Charlotte privacy without giving her solitude, and went on, in her indigo silk, to the south yews. In the kitchen, Mrs. Bell put the second batch of bread to rise. The dough was a long, pale ribbon under her hands. She folded it, turned it, folded it again, with the careful inattention of a woman who had been kneading dough since she was 9. She thought in succession about the apron in the linen press, the cap which she would not, despite her mistress's instructions, be burning, because Holland was Holland, and one did not burn good linen. The question of whether Lord Marcus would behave, in the long run, like a man who had been chastened, or a man who had been merely scared. And the question, more important than any of the others, of what particular wedding cake she would propose to make for a duke whose mother was eccentric, and a bride who was practical, and whose small, grave sister-in-law preferred her sweets without much frosting. By 6 o'clock, the long shadows had crossed the gravel sweep and were climbing the south face of the house. By 7, the lamps in the corridors were being lit. By 9:30, the household had eaten its dinner in companionable, exhausted quiet. Helen had been put to bed in the blue bedchamber with a small ceremony involving a candle, a glass of milk, and a careful kiss from her sister on the precise crown of her head. The dowager had retired to her own apartments. Mrs. Bell had retired, ostentatiously, to the housekeeper's room, on the understanding that she would not, in fact, retire to bed for another 2 hours, and that she could be relied upon to put out the corridor lamps when the master and his future bride had concluded whatever business had been keeping them up. That night, after Helen had been put to bed and the lamps in the corridor had been turned down to their lowest wick, the Duke of Ashbourne and Miss Charlotte Wickham sat in the library on either side of a single broad desk, with a green-shaded reading lamp between them, and went, page by page, through the 5 letters Marcus had written to her over the summer. It had not been Adrian's idea. He had suggested, gently, that perhaps the letters might be put away in a drawer and not looked at again. Charlotte had said, equally gently, that they would be looked at again, and properly, by the 2 of them, tonight, and never thereafter. "It is the same principle," she had said, "as cleaning a wound. You do not do it twice, you do it once, thoroughly, and then you bandage." The first letter was dated the 11th of June. "Listen to this." Charlotte leaned closer to the lamp. The light caught the edge of her cheek and turned a single, loose strand of dark hair to copper. Adrian, who had until that moment been entirely occupied with the question of Marcus, found himself entirely occupied with the question of how a single strand of hair caught light. He looked back at the page. He says, "I write as your father might, had he lived to see you in this delicate position. He never met my father. My father was the curate of a small village. He met him twice in his life, at a county dinner, and called him by the wrong Christian name on both occasions. He believed himself fatherly. He believed himself paid. There is a difference." Adrian smiled. It was a small smile. He did not let her see it. The second letter was dated the 3rd of July. Here he becomes more specific. "I have spoken with parties on the Surrey side." That is the line that first caught my attention. A Norfolk curate's daughter does not have business with Surrey parties. I read that sentence 3 times the morning it arrived, and I understood that he was speaking on behalf of someone with whom I had no personal quarrel. Lord Helmsley. Lord Helmsley, whom I have never met. Whom you will, I think, also never meet. Adrian. Charlotte set the letter down. When I read this in July, I had only one fear, not of Marcus, and not of Helmsley. Of you.
Of me? That you would, when you discovered all of it, decide that the simplest course was to dissolve the engagement quietly and apologize to me later. Many young men would, many young dukes especially. The mathematics is, what is the word? Convenient. A curate's daughter with an embezzling brother is not, on paper, an obvious match. On paper. On paper. Adrian leaned forward. His forearms rested on the desk, the lamplight catching the dark linen of his shirt sleeves where he had pushed them back. His hand was very close to hers. He did not move it. Charlotte. His voice was lower than it had been. I have known about William since June. I knew before I asked you the second time. I asked the second time anyway because I had already realized that what was on paper about you and what was you were two completely separate documents, and I had no interest in continuing to consult the wrong one. Charlotte did not look up from the letter. You are dangerous when you speak that way. Dangerous how? You are dangerous because if you continue, I shall have to set down a letter from your treacherous uncle in order to look at you, and I do not wish to be distracted in the middle of a piece of work. Then I shall not continue. Thank you. Until later. Adrian. I am told that future husbands occasionally permit themselves to flirt with their future wives across desks. Future wives occasionally pick up the inkstand and throw it at the future husband's head. I shall consider myself warned. They went on with the letters. The third was dated the 24th of July, the fourth, the 8th of August, the fifth, the most explicit, the one in which Marcus had finally named the £8,000, was dated the 29th of September. He grew impatient, Adrian said. He grew impatient, which means his Surrey gentleman was growing impatient. Helmsley wanted the matter concluded before the Gazette announcement. He wanted it concluded before October, because Anne Helmsley was about to confess her own engagement, and Helmsley wanted a fait accompli on his side before her father-in-law-to-be sent the formal letter from Lincoln's Inn. He has been racing against his own daughter for 2 months without knowing it. Adrian looked at the date of the 5th letter. Charlotte, when you received this, what did you do? I burned the envelope. I copied the letter. I sent the copy to my brother William's bookmaker in London with a request for any information he could provide about Lord Marcus's recent ride-out partners. I received the reply on the 11th of October. I packed for Ashbourne on the 12th. I arrived on the 14th. You came home a day early on the 15th. The whole matter has taken, she counted on her fingers with the candlelit precision of a young woman who liked things tallied, 4 months and 17 days. You have been running this affair in parallel with us. I have been running this affair while teaching my sister Latin verbs and 3 pieces of pianoforte by Mr. Clementi, and continuing to make my brother's breakfasts whenever he was at home. I have a great deal of practice doing several things at once. You will run my estates after we are married. I shall not. I shall run some of your estates, the ones that interest me, and you shall run the others. We shall have an annual meeting at which we compare ledgers. The estate that has been more profitably managed in the calendar year wins a private dinner of the winner's choosing. I accept the terms. You ought to. You will lose. I've been managing a curate's pension since I was 16. You have been managing a duchy for 5 years, and you still do not, I noticed at lunch, know what an audit of dairy accounts looks like. That is unfair. It is precise. I shall teach you in November. In November I shall have other priorities. In December, then. He laughed. It was not a careful laugh. It was the loud, helpless laugh of a man who has just discovered that the woman he intends to marry will, for the rest of his life, occasionally win an argument by simply noting that he is wrong, and that he will enjoy it. Charlotte, blotting the corner of a letter that had absorbed a stray bead of ink from the desk, did not look up. You laugh well. I am told it is genetic. By whom? By my mother, this morning. She said I laughed like my father, and that she had not heard the laugh in 9 years until you came down the stairs with Helen in your arms last night. The lamp guttered, briefly, on a draught from the window. Charlotte set the letter down. She looked across the desk at him for what was, by Henrietta's later description, the precise length of 3 breaths. And then she said, very quietly, "Adrian." "Yes." "Will you put your hand here on the desk?" He put his hand on the desk between them. She put hers on top of his. It was not the formal palm-up gesture they had used at dinner 2 nights ago, and at the writing desk that morning. This was different. This was her hand, laid flat over the back of his, the small, ink-warm weight of her fingers covering his knuckles, and she did not move it. He did not move his. Neither of them said anything for some seconds. It was Charlotte, eventually, who lifted her hand. "I am not, however, going to kiss you across a desk full of your uncle's correspondence." "No?" "It would be an insult to the future. Whenever I do kiss you, I shall remember it precisely. I should prefer not to remember Lord Marcus's handwriting in the background." "Quite sensible." "I am usually sensible." "You are. It is, among many things, what I love about you." There was a small silence. Charlotte did not, this time, lift her eyes. "You have not said that before." "I have not. I have been waiting to say it in the proper place. A library at midnight, the night we discovered which gentleman in Surrey was paying for the dissolution of our engagement, was not the proper place. I have been planning a south terrace at sunset, a hand in a hand. But I find, Charlotte, that I cannot quite govern my tongue tonight, and I will not waste a chance." "Then say it again." "I love you." "Once more." "I love you." "Thank you. I shall hold you to it. You will not be permitted to retract it on the grounds of midnight or correspondence." "I shall not retract it on any grounds." "Good." She did not say it back. He did not ask her to. He understood exactly why she would not. That there was a piece of the romantic stagecraft she meant to claim for herself on a day she had chosen, in a place she had chosen, after a deliberate pause that would frame the words properly. Charlotte Wickham did not improvise where she could plan. The "I love you" she would offer him would be a piece of architecture, not a moment of weather. He found that he did not mind waiting for the architecture. They closed the letters into a leather box. Charlotte locked the box. Adrian put the key into the desk drawer. The lamp was turned down. The library door was closed behind them. In the corridor, Charlotte turned to go up the staircase, and Adrian, entirely without planning the gesture, which was, for him, a remarkable departure, caught her hand at the foot of the banister and brought it briefly to his mouth. He did not kiss the palm. He did not kiss the knuckles. He kissed, with strict propriety, the soft inner skin of her wrist exactly where the pulse beat, and held the kiss for the length of one quick breath, and let her go. Charlotte did not say anything. She went up the staircase with her hand still curled where his mouth had touched it, and she did not, Henrietta later observed from the small landing, she had not, in fact, been pretending to dust, unfurl that hand until she had closed the bedchamber door behind her. The night before the wedding, 16 days into a thin, sharp November in which the frost came every morning to the south lawn, Charlotte sat in the small parlour with Helen on the floor at her feet, reading aloud from a worn copy of Sense and Sensibility, while Adrian, at the other end of the room, in a chair drawn close to the fire, pretended to be reading the Times and was, in fact, watching his future wife in firelight. Helen, who had been listening with her chin on her hand, said, without warning, "Charlotte, where shall I sleep tomorrow?" "In the blue bedchamber, the one beside mine." "And the night after?" "In the blue bedchamber, the one beside mine." "Forever?" "Until you are old enough to choose a different room. Then in whatever room you choose. You will live in this house, my love. Always. Unless one day you decide to live in another house, in which case you will live in that one. but you will not be sent anywhere by anyone, ever. Do you understand?
Helen considered this. She nodded.
And on your wedding day, she said, will you cry? I shall not. Will Adrian? I should think it extremely unlikely. Will grandmother? That is between grandmother and her handkerchief. We shall not discuss it in front of her. Quite right.
Helen returned to Marianne Dashwood. After a quarter of an hour, she fell asleep against the ottoman. Charlotte set the book aside. She rose, with the careful, slow movement of a young woman who did not wish to wake a sleeping child, and crossed the parlour to her future husband's chair. Adrian set the Times down. She did not sit. She stood in front of him, between his knees in the firelight, in the dark winter rose silk gown that had been altered that morning for the next day's ceremony. And she looked down at him, with the assessing grey eyes of a woman who had decided, sometime in the previous half hour, to take possession of a particular piece of architecture before the wedding made it routine. Adrian.
Yes.
I have not yet said it back.
You have not.
I have not asked. I have been waiting for the proper place. The proper place was supposed to be in the morning, at the altar, with 20 other people listening. I find I do not wish to share it with 20 other people. I wish to say it here, in this parlour, with Helen asleep, with your mother at the dower house, with Mrs. Bell pretending not to listen at the door.
Mrs. Bell is in the kitchen.
Mrs. Bell is at the door. I heard her 3 minutes ago. She is curious. Adrian rose from the chair. He did not, even then, reach for her. He let his hands stay at his sides. Charlotte.
I love you, Charlotte said, quietly, in the firelight. I have loved you since the second week of August in a Bath assembly room, when you said something unforgivably kind to a stranger about your father, in a voice you did not know I overheard. And I went home that night and wrote a name on a piece of paper and folded it into a book where my brother would not find it. I have loved you since June, when you asked me the second time, and I knew, even before you said it, that you had already inquired about William. I have loved you since the moment, 2 weeks ago, when I came down the staircase carrying Helen and saw you in the marble hall, in 2 counties worth of mud, and understood that you had ridden home a day early because you could not bear to be late to the woman you intended to marry. I have loved you for most of this year. I am very glad to be allowed, finally, to say so out loud. Adrian was quiet for a moment.
Charlotte.
May I kiss you now? Yes. He kissed her. He kissed her the way a young man kisses a woman he has been waiting for some months to kiss properly. With steadiness, with restraint, with a great deal of careful tenderness at the beginning, and a great deal less restraint afterwards. The fire crackled. Helen slept on the rug. From the corridor came, audible if one listened carefully, the small dry cough of Mrs. Bell removing herself, having heard quite enough. When Charlotte stepped back, after some considerable time, she put both hands flat against his chest and said, in a voice that was not entirely steady, "We shall need to be married tomorrow."
Yes.
At 10 o'clock.
At 10 o'clock.
Sharp.
Sharp.
And Adrian.
Yes.
You smell of your father's shaving soap. Your mother told me on Friday. I had wondered. I am pleased to confirm it.
My father would have liked you.
I should have liked him. We shall walk past his portrait together tomorrow, after the service, on our way to the dining room, and I shall greet him properly.
She rose on her toes and kissed him once more, briefly, on the corner of his mouth, and went to gather a small, grave, sleeping, owl-faced child into her arms, and carry her up the staircase to the blue bedchamber where she would sleep that night, for the last time as a Wickham. Adrian stood by the fire and watched them go. He was, Mrs. Bell later told the Dowager Duchess in the kitchen over a quiet pot of chamomile tea, smiling the foolish smile of a man who who has been kissed in the right room at the right moment by the right woman, and who has discovered that the worst thing about being a duke is having to find time, between estate business, to feel that particular kind of foolish. He looked, Mrs. Bell said, like his father. He always did, said Henrietta. More so. Yes, more so. The two of them sat by the kitchen fire and drank chamomile tea, and Mrs. Bell, who had been a young housemaid at Ashbourne the night Henrietta herself had been kissed in a small parlour by the late Duke before her own wedding, 42 years ago, did not need to point this out, because Henrietta, who remembered everything, was already pointing it out to herself. After a long pause, Mrs. Bell rose and crossed to the linen press in the corner. "Well," said Mrs. Bell. "Well, the cap and the apron are in the linen press. Burn them. They are perfectly good Holland. Then give them to a proper maid. I do not want to see them again." "Yes, Your Grace." "And Mrs. Bell." "Yes." "You wrote to my son." "I did." "On the second day of my preparations." "I did." "You ought to be dismissed." "I ought." "I should have to find another housekeeper. It would be tedious. I should have to look at resumes. I should have to interview 6 women in cap and apron in this very kitchen and dislike all of them. It is not worth the inconvenience. You may remain." "Thank you, Your Grace." "You will, however, never again countermand my schemes by writing to my son." "I will, however, write to your son the next time you propose to dress as a parlour-maid in your own house." "There will not be a next time, Mrs. Bell. I have learned my lesson." "You have learned half a lesson, Your Grace." "Which half?" "The half that says you may not deceive a future daughter-in-law for 2 days without paying for it in tears at 4 in the morning." "And the other half?" "The half that says you may, occasionally, trust your son." "Ah." Henrietta sat down at the long oak table. She rested her elbows on the wood, which she had not done since she was 19, and her father had told her that duchesses did not rest their elbows on tables, and looked at the woman who had been her co-conspirator in the running of Ashbourne Hall for 30 years. "You are quite right, Mrs. Bell." "I am usually right." "You are. It is one of your less attractive qualities." "I have many less attractive qualities, Your Grace. We shall have time to enumerate them after the wedding." Henrietta laughed. It was the first true laugh she had laughed in 9 years, and it sounded, to her surprise, very like her son's. The Duke of Ashbourne married Miss Charlotte Wickham of Norfolk on the 17th of November in the small parish church on the Ashbourne estate, in a private ceremony attended by the Dowager Duchess, the bride's 11-year-old sister, 3 Norfolk neighbours, 4 old friends of the late Duke, and the curate who had baptized the bride 26 years earlier, and who wept openly through the entire service. The bride wore a gown of dark winter rose silk, trimmed at the cuffs and hem with seed pearls that had once belonged to the dowager's grandmother. The groom wore his father's wedding coat, which had been let out at the shoulders by ½ an inch by Mrs. Bell on the Sunday before. The dowager wore indigo, with the Ashbourne emerald at her throat, and stood as witness for the bride at her own request, a small irregularity that the curate, on consultation with Charlotte, permitted on grounds of pastoral judgment. Helen scattered rosemary at the church door, because Charlotte said rosemary was traditional and lasted longer than rose petals in November, and Helen approved of practical things. Lord Marcus Ashbourne did not attend. He sent a brief, formal letter of congratulation from Bath, where he had taken modest lodgings of a kind compatible with his actual income, and which Henrietta read aloud at the wedding breakfast in the dry voice of a woman acknowledging that a piece of household business had been satisfactorily concluded. Lord Helmsley of Surrey did not attend. He had, on receiving Marcus's letter of return and the unwelcome confirmation from his daughter's barrister, retreated to a Yorkshire estate to consider his social position, where, Henrietta was reliably informed, he was being lectured daily by Lady Anne, who had married her barrister in a quiet ceremony in October, and was, by all accounts, extraordinarily happy. William Wickham did not attend. He was in Boston, working as a junior clerk in a shipping firm on Long Wharf, and he had, by the time of his sister's wedding, repaid £4 3 of the 43 he owed to the Norfolk widow. Charlotte read his small, careful letters once a fortnight, with composure, and answered them once a month, with brevity. She did not invite him home. He did not ask to come. The wedding breakfast was small. It was set in the long dining room, at the centre of the room rather than the head, around a circular arrangement that Mrs. Bell had specifically requested of the under-butler, on the principle that a small wedding deserved a small table, and that no one, least of all the bride, should sit 23 feet from the person nearest her at her own wedding breakfast. The white linen had been laundered 3 times in the previous week. The silver was the wedding silver of the late Duke and his wife, used twice a year on average and polished, that morning, by 3 of the upper housemaids, until it cast back the candlelight in the precise, warm reflection of well-cared-for plate. There were lilies in a low silver bowl in the centre. Charlotte had asked for white in November, which the gardener had thought was eccentric, until he discovered, with no small admiration, that the lower glasshouse had 3 blooms remaining from the late summer planting that had been forced for exactly this purpose. There was wine from the late Duke's private stock, the Madeira that he had laid down in the autumn of 1815. There were 3 small toasts, one from the curate, one from the Duke, and one from Helen, who had stood on her chair, declared with magisterial solemnity that this was the happiest day she could remember, and sat down again with the composure of a child who had taken approximately 4 months to write the speech and intended to live by it. But the laughter at it, Henrietta thought, was the kind of laughter she had not heard in this house in 9 years. And as she watched her son cut the cake with a hand that had grown to the exact shape of his father's, and her new daughter-in-law direct a plate to a small, grave, owl-faced child by the fire who was being permitted, for the first time in her short life, to eat as many scones as she liked, the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne thought of the morning 2 days before the bride had arrived. The morning she had tied a borrowed apron and looked into the glass, and she was quietly, profoundly, embarrassed by the woman she had seen. She did not apologize for that woman. She had, on the night of her unmasking, apologized once. Charlotte had received the apology, accepted it, and refused to allow it to be repeated. "I shall not be the daughter-in-law who lets her mother-in-law grovel," Charlotte had said. "It would set a precedent that would exhaust us both for the next 30 years. We will speak of this twice more, once on my wedding day, and once at our first quarrel. And then we shall not speak of it again." So Henrietta did not apologize again on the wedding day. She only walked over, when the cake had been cut, and put her hand on Charlotte's hand on the back of the chair, and said, quietly, in the new daughter-in-law's ear, "I am very glad it is you." "I know," said Charlotte. "I knew when you came in with the apricot conserve." "You did not." "I did. I thought to myself, that woman has too proud a wrist for chamber work. And then I thought, she has come down the back stairs to see who I am. And then I thought, she has done it because she loves him. And then I thought, she and I are going to do very well together. You have a great deal of arrogance for a curate's daughter, Charlotte." "I have a great deal of certainty, mother." Charlotte said the word casually, as if she had been calling Henrietta by it for years. "It is not the same thing." Henrietta squeezed her hand, and went to find Mrs. Bell, who was, of course, already standing by the door of the dining room with 2 glasses of the late Duke's good Madeira. 6 months later, in the May of 1827, the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne, accompanied by a small grave child of nearly 12, walked out across the south lawn of Ashbourne Hall to plant a row of cherry saplings along the path that led from the rose garden to the long pond. It had been Charlotte's idea. The path had no shade, she had said in March, and shade was civil. And so a row of cherries, 6 of them, were ordered from a nursery in Kent, and arrived on a wet Thursday morning, and the gardener and 3 under-gardeners had prepared the holes the day before.
Helen carried the smallest of the saplings, because she had insisted on planting her own. Charlotte carried a wicker basket that held, among other things, a small loaf of fresh bread wrapped in clean linen, 2 apples, and a flask of warm tea, because the planting was expected to take some hours. Adrian carried nothing. He had been told by his wife that the function of a duke at a tree planting was to look impressive and to lift heavy soil when asked. He was content with this. The Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne walked behind them with Mrs. Bell, both ladies in sensible half-boots, both ladies carrying neither anything heavy nor anything decorative, both ladies engaged in a low-voiced conversation about whether the housekeeper at the Dower House had finally learned to make a respectable damson preserve. She had not. Henrietta had moved out of the main house in February. She had moved into the Dower House on the south edge of the park, which had not been lived in for 9 years. She had asked her son's permission as a courtesy, and had been firmly told it was not his decision. She had then asked her daughter-in-law's, and Charlotte had said only, "Will you be happier there?" And on receiving the answer, had said, "Then yes." Henrietta had taken Mrs. Bell with her, which had distressed the housekeeper at the main house, a younger woman of 40, whom Mrs. Bell had been training as a successor for 2 years, for approximately 4 hours, until she discovered that Mrs. Bell had left behind a complete written household manual of 73 pages and a standing invitation to come and complain on Tuesdays. The first sapling went into its hole at 11:15, the second at 15:15. By noon, 4 were in. Helen, kneeling in the damp grass with her hands in the soil, looked up at the older sister, whom she now called, sometimes, my sister Duchess, and announced, "I am thirsty." "There is tea in the basket, my love. Pour Adrian a cup as well. He has been pretending to look impressive for an hour, and I think he is tired of it." "I am not tired of it. It is what I am for." "You are also for lifting the 5th one." "Quite right." Adrian rolled up his sleeves. He bent. He lifted the 5th sapling. The shirt strained across his shoulders. Charlotte glanced once, sidelong, at her husband, with an expression Henrietta, sitting on a folded carriage blanket some yards away, recognized with great amusement. The expression of a young wife who has been married 6 months and has discovered, to her quiet satisfaction, that her husband remains as handsome in mud as he was at the altar. Adrian set the 5th sapling into its hole. He glanced sidelong at his wife. Henrietta looked away, because there were limits to what a mother-in-law ought to witness on a public lawn, even at her own family's tree planting. Helen brought her a cup of warm tea. "Grandmother, my love, Charlotte says that when these trees grow, I shall be 16, and the cherries will fall on the grass, and we shall have to make a great deal of jam." "That is correct." "Can I make jam?" "You can make jam. You can also make preserves, conserves, jellies, and a quite revolting thing called marmalade. We shall start with jam." "Will you teach me?" "I will teach you. Mrs. Bell will help. Your sister will supervise. Your brother-in-law will be banned from the kitchen on the grounds that he eats the fruit before we can boil it." "That is what Charlotte said." "Charlotte is correct. She is usually correct. I should like you to remember that when, in 8 or 10 years, you reach the age at which you decide you have outgrown your older sister's advice, she will still be correct. You will simply be temporarily deaf." "I will remember, grandmother." Helen kissed her cheek with the careful deliberation of a child to whom kisses had been, until recently, rare and rationed. She went back to the planting. Henrietta sat in the May sunlight with her hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea, and watched her son and her daughter-in-law, and the child who had become her granddaughter, set the 6th and last cherry sapling into the earth at the edge of the path that ran from the rose garden to the long pond. She thought, with the same quiet astonishment she had been carrying for 6 months, "I tied an apron round my waist and went to test her. I went to test her." And she has, gently, without ever pointing out that she was doing it, tested all of us, and we have all of us turned out to be slightly better than we believed.
The warm wind moved through the new leaves of the elms, and the cool stone of the bench pressed gently against her hand. It was, Henrietta noted with the precision of a woman who had been watching the same elms for 30 years, a southerly wind. The kind that brought rain by Wednesday and warmth by Friday. The kind that meant the lambs at the home farm would be sheltering under the hedge by tea time, but that the kitchen garden would not need watering for the rest of the week. The new leaves, smaller than the leaves the elms would have by midsummer, were the precise translucent green of a fresh apple, and they took the light unevenly, the way young leaves do, so that the whole canopy seemed to shimmer between two slightly different colors of green every time the wind moved through it. Somewhere down by the stables, a horse was being walked on the gravel, the iron-shod hooves striking the warm stone yard in a slow, steady rhythm. Henrietta could hear the slow, deliberate clop of shod hooves and the murmur of the head groom's voice. Somewhere in the kitchen garden, beyond the yew hedge, a wheelbarrow was being trundled along the brick path. She could hear the squeak of one wheel. Somewhere closer, in the gravel sweep, Helen's small, clear voice was asking a question. Henrietta did not catch the question, but she caught Charlotte's quieter answer, and the answer made the Duke laugh, and the laughter, carried on the southerly wind, sounded, Henrietta thought, with a small, private satisfaction, like the laughter of a man who had been laughing only 6 months and intended to make up for the years he had lost. Mrs. Bell, beside her, did not speak for some moments. She was watching the same scene Henrietta was watching. She was, Henrietta knew without looking, drawing the same conclusions from it, with the same private satisfaction. The two women had been drawing the same conclusions about the same scenes for 31 years, and the practice had, over time, worn a small invisible groove in the air between them, along which an observation could travel from one of them to the other, without anyone needing to speak. Mrs. Bell, beside her, lifted her own cup of tea. "You are smiling, Your Grace." "I am." "It is a foolish smile." "Is it?" "It is the smile of a woman who has lived to be wrong about the right thing." "Yes," said Henrietta. "That is exactly what it is." In the south corner of the lawn, the Duke of Ashbourne, broad through the shoulders, dark gold in the morning sun, a streak of soil across one cheekbone, straightened from the 6th sapling and said, "There, now, tea." Charlotte handed him a cup. Their hands touched in the passing. Helen put her own small palm flat against the bark of the sapling and said, with the gravity of a child making a vow, "Grow well. I will look after you." The cherry sapling, having no opinion on the matter, swayed slightly in the May breeze, and from the dower house chimney across the park, a thin plume of smoke rose into a sky the colour of fresh blue silk. Because Mrs. Bell, having anticipated, as she always did, the exact moment at which the planting party would want a hot luncheon, had instructed the dower house cook, before she left, to have a soup ready by noon. It was, in fact, noon, and the soup, when they walked up to it, was apricot, made from the last jar of the previous summer's conserve. Because some traditions, in some houses, begin in the most unlikely places, over a borrowed apron and a maid's cap, and a tray carried down a back stair by a Duchess who had once believed she was clever enough to test her son's wife, and who had been, in the end, taught a great deal more than she had set out to teach. If you have ever judged someone before you met them, and lived long enough to be wrong about it, you may know what the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne felt that morning. Stay with me for the next story, where another house with a great deal of pride learns a similar lesson. And tell me, in the comments, the first time you discovered that the person you had quietly distrusted was, instead, the person who would save you. Subscribe, so the next fire is waiting when you come home.